Tablighi Jamaat, a house divided, TJ terrorism failures, part 3 of 4. So in this section, I would like to discuss the nature of the TJ and how they fulfill Dr. Harvey W. Kushner's 3 factors that all terrorist groups contain. So the 3 factors are on the screen, but specifically violence. TJ, as will be proven, are the most violent group in recent history, most violent Islamic group in recent history, and I'll bring evidence for that. Their targets, they specifically target civilians, and when they've been used, I use that word, they have been used, they attack governmental institutions as well. And as is known from their 6 foundations and their 5 acts, they are very strongly motivated to bring about societal change. And that is obviously linked to political change. But specifically, the reasons for their failure are the following. Um, there's 5 reasons, and the 6th refers to a lecture done by Dr. Jacob Ollie Dort, which I'll discuss as we go on. So the 6 things are: number 1, TJs are apolitical. They cannot develop a counter narrative to terrorism because they're not political by their nature. Number 2, they don't study in any depth. And in fact, one of their seminal scholars, Ashraf Ali Thanvi, promoted half-baked scholarship by uh, radically reducing the study programs for the TJ. Number 3, the limitations of taqleed. Taqleed is following qualified scholarship, but when you do it blindly and you do it without thought and you do it without considering and pondering upon what you're actually studying, this leads to limitations, and it's all part and parcel of the cult control. Number 4, there's a lack of centralized control. So terrorists can function and swim within the groups of TJ because there's no control. Number 5, Salafi groups, and in part 4, I'll give the example of Richard Reed and Zacharias Musawi, based upon the work of Dr. Anthony Baker at the University of Exeter. Salafis have breaks. Salafism starves terrorism of oxygen, and TJs, because they have no centralized control, they have this cult-like nature, they don't have these breaks. That's why it can subsist and exist in this TJ environment. And number 6, this is a critique of Jacob Ollie Dort's analysis and a critique of his analogy, but I won't mention that straight away. The fuel for terrorism is not specifically TJ or Salafi ideas. That is not the fuel for terrorism, and it's not Islam. Islam is a religion. Bad people will come to the religion, and good people will come to the religion. Bad people will leave the religion, and good people will leave the religion. The ideas of Tabligh, the beliefs of Tabligh, do not drive terrorism. Tabligh and Salafism is exactly the same as communism and Marxism and socialism and democracy, you could say, is a force for starting wars in the world. That is simply a vehicle. The ideas that fuel terrorism are overwhelmingly pecuniary, financial, and socio-political. So with that, we'll continue. The first thing is we have to quote 2 articles here. One of them is quite anti-TJ and anti-Islam, and it's based at a site called the ME Forum, which is also another think tank called Islamist Watch. And I recommend you to read all these articles. I don't have the time to read all the articles to you. That's your job. So it states, it is also important to note that in Pakistan, TJ has further demonstrable connections with terror groups. Top-level recruiters from terror groups have visited cadres in Raywand, and then he talks about military TJ military offshoots Jihad bis Saif, and it talks about Harakat al-Mujahideen, founded in 1980 from the TJ. It talks about the terrorist attack in India, hijacking of planes, 6,000 Tablighis trained in Harakat al-Mujahideen camps, another group called Harakat al-Jihad al-Islami, active in Kashmir and Gujarat. And clearly, these are all TJ based groups, TJ based foundations. The TJ has been very, very active in violence in modern history. And another tempered article, this time at the Pew Forum, and this is a lot more academic and it's not as uh, anti TJ and anti Islam. The Pew Research Center, it states, while most followers of the TJ are primarily interested in matters of personal piety and spiritual self renewal, some have been accused of having ties to radical networks. This concern has been raised from time to time since the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the US, and the group's missionary activities and loose organizational structure can be exploited by radical elements. Shoe bomber Richard Reed, who in 2001 tried to set off a bomb on a commercial aircraft, and John Walker Lind, the American citizen captured by US forces and Taliban soldiers, both spent time in Tablighi circles. And these two, in particular, Lind and Reed, both spent time in Salafi circles. So it's important to note that here. They spent time in TJ and Salafi circles. But as the fourth part will show when I study Richard Reed specifically, Salafism suffocates extremism of oxygen. And so subsequently, Richard Reed, who could not um, promote his violent uh, uh, terroristic ideas within Salafism, as documented by Dr. Baker, had to leave. And where could he find the oxygen to breathe and to promote his ideas? Within the ranks of TJs. That's an important point to note. So these are two articles that you can read. And now I'll come to Dr. Jacob Olidort. Now, Olidort states that, and he gives an analogy of the vehicle, the movement needed to support and promote violent extremism and terrorism. And he says the vehicle, the engine, won't move without a fuel, and the fuel seems to be Salafi ideas. This is totally wrong and this is totally fallacious, because the ideas that he's referring to are the same ideas that people like Shiraz Ma refers to. Things like al-wala wal-bara, loving and hating. Things like at-takfir wal-hijra, excommunication and emigration, and calling other people non-Muslims, and things like al-hakimiyya, ruling and governance by Allah. These are not exclusive Salafist or Tablighi ideas. These are Islamic ideas. Al-wala wal-bara and takfir, excommunicating Muslims, and hijrah and emigration. These are all things that happened in Islamic history. So the vehicle could be Marxism or communism. And when, if we accept the ideas of global research, if we have a vehicle, the vehicle could be anything. The thing that fuels it is not Salafi ideas or Tablighi ideas. The thing that fuels it is money and societal and political motivations and factors. So his analogy is totally false. And in fact, uh, if a person in Afghanistan or in Pakistan that's part of the TJ group, if they are content and they have clean running water, they have food, they have the ability to get an education, the ability to better themselves and better the lives of their families, there is no reason whatsoever that they would participate in extremist activity. However, when you take away those things, clean water, clean food, no shelter, destruction of infrastructure, and then you offer them a way to fight their oppressor, which is exactly what the empire, the Anglo-American empire does in these regions, then their reasons to uh, fight against their oppressor becomes a lot more pressing. And here a quote from a book, and this book is written by Jason Burke. I hold in my hand the 2003 edition. On the back of it, Chomsky states that this is essential reading. The most illuminating study I know gives remarkable insight into Islamic militancy. So Chomsky gives high praise for this book. It states, Jason Burke states on page number 93, in 1879 there were 12 Deobandi madrasas. By 1967 there were 9,000 across South Asia, including nearly 1,000 in Pakistan. Many had been established in the more conservative Pashtun areas of the NWFP. By the 1980s and by 1988, nearly 400,000 boys and young men were being educated by Deobandis in Pakistan. And then he states, the key to the growth was the huge funds that flowed into the Deobandi madrasas from the Gulf, when governments and donors there had decided that the Deobandis were the closest local equivalent to the Wahhabis, and thus they should be sponsored as part of the global push to encourage the spread of hardline Salafi strands of Islam. Then he mentions later, for millions of destitute Afghan refugee children, as well as poor Pakistanis, the free education, board, and lodging offered by the Deobandi madrasas was very attractive. End of quote. Here, explicitly, the money is the fuel. The money is the fuel. The societal and political change is the fuel. The beliefs are irrelevant. And also, to support the early assertions that I made, I refer, and I can't do it in detail because this episode is running over, I refer to the works of Muhammad Qasim Zaman, and I'll give the screenshot on the screen. I won't read it, but you can read it for yourself. Ashraf Ali Thanvi promotes half-baked, scant Tablighi study. You could read that for yourself. There is a lack of centralized control. Salafis have breaks because, and I'll give an article where you can read, and later on when I study him, I'll give it in detail. Salafis suffocate terrorism of violent ideas. TJ simply can't. That's why these Deobandi madrasas can exist, and that's why they can promote, uh, notwithstanding the fact that they have Gulf funding. And the fuel is, as I've just shown, money and socio-political change. It's not the belief system. Stay tuned for the case study of Richard Reed, and I'll go into that explicitly using Dr. Baker's analysis.